Our first author presentation is by LaRue Agresti, who is the author of Boomer Tales. This book is very dear to my heart since I'm almost a boomer. I'm sort of an older boomer, but I'm proud of our generation. Nevertheless, we went through everything, and now pandemic. So we have a lot of credit to look at. So without further ado, LaRue Agresti talking about her book on Boomer Tales.
Thank you. First, I want to say it's so nice to be in a supportive atmosphere, because when you write, you have to kind of go into a void in order to focus and get it done, and you feel very alone. I am a second generation Italian. I am my dad's family came from Abruzzo. My mother's family is from Sicily. So growing up in that household alone was, let's put it this way, an adventure on a good day and treacherous on a bad day. So they met, and when my dad was, he was 20 and my mother was 24, but their birthdays were 6 days apart. And so my dad's was on the 23rd of October and hers was on the 29th. He told her he was 6 days older. She had no idea until they went to get engaged. And then when they went to get engaged, at that time, a mother had to sign off for their son, for their son to be married unless he was 21. And when my grandmother found out that my mother was A, Sicilian, and B, 4 years older, she told my dad in Italian that he was marrying the change of life. Yeah. So I grew up in a very eccentric household. My parents were very much in very much Americanized. They wanted to be Americanized. And I think that, growing up, it's like, it was like, I knew I was ethnic. I knew that I looked different. I knew that, I just never quite felt American, but they just always seemed to be in this kind of rush to be an American. And just like my mother was the anti-Italian woman, she was a terrible cook. I mean, I actually literally got out of the house without, knowing how to boil an egg. So it was a very American, upbringing. And the first place that I remember living is, the book is about, it's a journey through the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. But it's a memoir, and it's about growing up as an Italian American in Chicago. And it was a different time because the book is just loaded with characters, bizarre events. Well, people weren't as pasteurized then because you didn't have to be politically correct. And we moved 5 times while I was in school. So every neighborhood had its unique cast of characters. But the first neighborhood I remember living in was Madison and Pulaski. And I went to St. Mel's there for half of first grade and all of kindergarten. And then we moved a little bit further northwest. We moved around Pulaski and Belmont. We really were not supposed to be there. We were supposed to be in the Lady of Angels parish. And my parents had found a beautiful apartment there, and my dad wanted to take it. And all of a sudden, my mother just got a bad feeling. And so we didn't take it. Had we have taken it, my younger sister, and I would have both been at the school at the time of the fire. We then moved even further northwest. We moved around Austin University. Now that was my dad's old neighborhood where he had grown up. His parents had immigrated from Abruzzo, and my grandfather, Vincenzo Agresti, was a shoemaker, and he worked for Forest-Time Shoes. My dad said he had fingers like bananas because in those days they would form the leather by hand. It was an art form. Well, Vincenzo built this big brick bungalow on Monitor and Altgeld, and it had an English basement. And my grandmother, Agnesa, was very business-minded, so she had a grocery store in the basement. That grocery store fed the whole neighborhood during the Depression because my grandmother didn't believe in turning anybody away. And so, years later, we found books, ledgers in the basement where people never did, pay her. Agnesa had 8 children. One succumbed to infant mortality. So there was 7 children. My dad was the youngest of 7. Unfortunately, my grandfather died right in the middle of the Depression. Well, it's hard to believe now, but it's like at that time, a woman could not have a mortgage in her name. Now, the only income they had was from this grocery store, and the bank wanted to take the house. My grandmother had to enlist a lawyer to put the house in her name, in his name, so she could pay him. And of course, all the kids went out to work or they worked in the store. My dad was 9, he went out to shoe shine, but they managed to hold on to the house. That house had great memories for me because my grandmother still owned the store when I was a little girl. So when my cousins and I would all go there, we'd go get free candy in the basement, the basement of the store. And then we'd sit out on the stoops like big shots, because to the neighbor kids, because our grandmother owned the store, we'd get free candy. But my mother's experience was really different. Her parents immigrated from Sicily. And my grandfather, they were the Grecos. Joseph Greco was a barber, and they settled out in Tinley Park, and he was the town barber. My grandmother, Mary, was this tiny little thing, way smaller than me, and she gave birth to 14 children. 12 survived, 6 boys, 6 girls. Okay, so now they're going through the Depression. Who's getting a haircut? Nobody. And they've got 14 mouths to feed with themselves and the kids. So my mother said they had to go on what they called relief. Now we'd probably call it welfare. But they managed to hang on. She would talk about all the hand-me-down clothes and shoes, and that her feet never were right from the ill-fitting shoes that she had to hobble to school with, where my dad, for the first 9 years of his life, had custom-made shoes. They both had really different experiences, but I think I was very insulated because when we moved into that neighborhood, when I was still in grammar school, it was predominantly Italian. So I went to school with a lot of Italian American kids my age. And the neighborhood was predominantly Italian, Polish, and a little bit of Irish. And my aunts were all married. Most of my dad's sisters were married to Polish men. So that was kind of our culture. And it seemed normal. And so I was kind of insulated from that. And I think now, as an adult, I became more aware of all the prejudice and all the discrimination, that happened. And I think my grandparents probably fared better because they had a trade at least. Because the people that came here without a trade had to be day laborers or they couldn't get hired at all. How the book got started. The book got started. My first love, we were talking about readers and writers. My first love was reading. I remember being 6 years old and being at St. Mel's and, see Jane run. I thought that was like a miracle. When I learned to read, I thought this is like the biggest miracle in the world. And then my second love was writing, because then I started doing that when I was like 9, 10 years old. And what I used to do is I would write plays and then tell the kids, in the neighborhood, empty out your mom's closet, all the old shoes and clothes and hats, and try to put together costumes. And I try and direct them in the play. And it was always a disaster because it was like herding cats. I was an avid diary keeper. And then when I was in my teens, my mother, she had a lot of mental problems, and she was very mentally volatile, found my diary, got me in a ton of trouble. And I kind of got writer's block after that. I got like where I was paranoid, to write anything down. So fast forward, I become an accountant. First 10 years of my life, I worked for big firms like Arthur Rudloff, New York Life, and I hated it. I hated being in an office. So I went to barber school because you got to remember, my grandfather was a barber. He had 6 sons. Out of the 6 sons, 5 became barbers. So I grew up twirling around in barber chairs, eating the suckers that they would give the kids. And then at Christmas, it was the chocolate marshmallow Santa Clauses. And I had all through Chicago, I had 5 uncles that either had shops or worked in shops all around Chicago. I never did any celebrities though. So I decided that I wanted to be an entrepreneur and have my own businesses. But and the characters too, just talking about characters surrounding me. My one uncle Frank had the barber shop over by Austin and Lawrence, and he had the resident bookie, and there was a guy named Slew. And I think he made more money on the horses with the inside tips than he ever made cutting hair. So I had the shops, and then I kind of, moved on from there, and I got into real estate, and then I started to use my third love, which is decorating. I started working for builders, became very active in Greater Chicago home builders, and did model homes and, model apartments and clubhouses, senior buildings. And so, but while I was using this third love, the second love resurfaced because I started writing articles for the trade publications, and I really loved it. So in the middle of all this, my sister was a pack rat and keeps everything, unlike me. She calls me up one day and she says, I found all of your letters and your postcards that you wrote from Florida Keys when you were a hippie living in a commune in the early 70s. So she sent them to me, and I kind of put them in order and tried from memory to fill in the blanks, but the kind of things we did then were, it was amazing I could remember anything to fill in, but I did. And I thought, oh, this is a great little novella. This would make a great little film. And so I gave it to another one of my Italian American friends, and he was also working on a book about his family. And he says, you need to write more. And I was like, write more. It's like, So consequently, chapter 14 is called Key Lime Pie. It's in the book, and it's the heart of the book. And it's where the book started, but I expounded out. And by doing that, I did this deep dive, into the family and writing about the family and the culture. And it was really a profound experience for me. And about 20 years ago, my daughter was newly married, and she was thinking of starting a family. So she said, oh, before I get pregnant, we got to go to Italy. So I was like, okay, let's see, go to Italy, get a grandchild. Okay, book it. That was a no-brainer. So we booked a tour, but we decided to go in a week earlier to check out because we were going to be in Rome. So, Abruzzo was just east of Rome, to go look at the little towns that my grandparents grew up in. My dad's father was from Chieti, and my mother, his mother was from a little mountain town called Popoli. Well, I understood why my grandmother never adjusted to life here. And my older cousins tell me that my great-grandmother actually died because she starved herself to death because she hated it here so much. And so that, there was this, and my grandmother insisted that, my dad's mother insisted that they all speak Italian in the house. So my dad knew the Abruzzo dialect. But on the other hand, my mother didn't know, any Italian, because you got to remember it was 12 kids. Well, with 12 kids, they didn't want the kids to understand them because they had no privacy except that the kids couldn't understand them. I don't know if it would have helped because I remember seeing my grandmother sitting together and trying to talk, and the two dialects were, they really had a hard time understanding each other. So I made trips back over the years, and always would go. I've been all through Sicily on my one trip, but I'd always kind of end up, always going to these towns in Abruzzo. So I was really fortunate. My husband and I, 4 years ago, purchased a villa there. So now I'm trying to learn Italian because the villa it's in Abruzzo, but it's in a small town called Castellanti. It's only about 1,200 people. And of course, in order to communicate, you need to know how to speak Italian. The one thing I will say is that having a Chicago accent is you have to drop your hard vowels. It just, for instance, like our home there is called Casa Anitra. Well, when I first bought it, I was saying Casa Anitra, because it's the Chicago accent. So I will say this, it's like, it has really helped me, really discover, who I am, because there was such a rush to be Americanized by my parents, and people anglicize their names, and people will say to me, what is it like? And I say, everybody talks about the art or the architecture, the food, the wine, but it's the people. The people are the absolute, treasure there. And, for me, it's been like, I feel like when I'm there, I've gone full circle for my grandparents, and especially for my grandmother, that was, she was always so homesick, and it's just their money the hustle bustle is not important. Art is important. You know, if you are a writer or you are an artist or you do anything, a musician, you know, that is what is considered important there. And, you know, for me, I'm hoping to get back there in September. It's been, you know, because of the pandemic, it's been a year and a half. As far as the book, I went back to my original story, you know, in my head of how this should be a film. And so I decided a couple of years ago, in fact, it was right the year before the pandemic, to seek out an Italian-American Chicago female director. And because I thought, well, this is a Chicago story, it's an Italian-American story, and it's a woman's story. And I did source somebody, and her name is Oriana Opesi. We met, she read the book, and she wanted to take on the project. She brought in another Italian-American director that she had worked with, and they wrote a screenplay. So we were getting ready to film the trailer when the pandemic hit. So we're hoping now to be able to start filming the trailer soon, and then doing a premiere. And when we do the premiere, we would like to invite the Chicago Italian-American community in to see the premiere. So yeah. You do. Wonderful. And you know, I will say, you know, even though I'll just wind up with this, even though, you know, it was like growing up, it was like I was kind of shielded, you know, from a lot of the prejudice. I always felt different. And, you know, you got to remember being a little girl growing up in the 50s, 60s. Well, the epitome of beauty in America was a blonde bombshell with Marilyn Monroe. You know, you had Gina Lola Brigida, which I loved, and Sophia Loren, but they were considered exotic. And so I always knew I wasn't that. And so people will say to me, how do you feel when you're in Italy? And I say, my face feels right there. And I have to say my face feels right here too. Thank you.
Very good. We might be cousins. My father was born in Abruzzo in the